Nobody flipping packs now.
Back at it again here on the State of Football Part 112 edition, going up on a Tuesday. It's what we do here, brought to you by the NFLDraftBible.com, broadcasting live here in New Jersey. It's what we do since 2002. Ric Serritella here, sending out the airwaves across the globe, along with John Murphy down there in New Orleans, the VP of player personnel for the Toronto Argonauts. We've got Russ Lande out in Chicago, Calgary Stampeders scout, over 50 years of scouting experience combined here on the panel. I don't know, Russ may have 50 himself. And this is what we do here on Tuesdays. We talk about NFL draft, prospects, all kinds of good things, and really there's nobody I enjoy chopping it up more than these two guys. That's why I wore the RU shirt, because we're just chopping, and we've got big news, big news here on the State of Football. We'll give it a little bit of time for people to wake up, join the chat room. Shout out to all our chat room peoples. I don't see you in there, but I know you're here. I know you'll drop us a line eventually and say hello to Russell and John and Rick.
Does it bother you a little bit that Rick is saying we're the most important, the biggest show? He loves Tuesdays, but doesn't bother to shave for us? I mean, what's going on here?
Well, you know, we got the grind. I showed up.
That's it. That's impressive.
You should be happy I showed up today. And second of all, guests should not interrupt my opening monologue. With that being said, since Russ has no patience, we'll dive into today's show. Get the scuba gear ready. You got the goggles on, Ross. We're going deep sea fishing with some prospects. We'll talk about bowl game risers. We'll take a look at the college football championship preview. Of course, a lot of rumblings, front office, head coach, GMs, requests being put in. We'll talk about all that and more. But first, the NCAA hit us with a bombshell yesterday. And we've talked about this. Of course, Mondays we have Ralph Ventry, the co-commissioner of the Northeast Conference, and he's expressed how the NCAA's spring obligation is getting in March Madness, ensuring that we have a Final Four. My understanding is this new strain now that's hit New York and probably all the rest of the country. You see the lockdown in the UK going on right now. They are saying the new strain will peak come March. The big goal for the NCAA is to have this big March Madness tournament, which, oh, by the way, coincides with the NFL Combine schedule. NCAA announcing yesterday that March Madness will take place the last 2 weeks of February and into the first 7 or 10 days or so of March, which has completely put the NFL Combine on ice. This is a clear conflict of interest. There will be no way city officials in Indianapolis allow March Madness and the Combine to happen during the same week. Just ain't happening. Now, the NFL, and this is a report that Sports Illustrated came out with yesterday, the NFL refuses to move the NFL draft, and we saw this last year, right? They held firm. You know, the Embassy Suites, shout out to the Embassy Suites in Cleveland. We've got boots on the ground in Cleveland. The city is all in on these dates. And I believe that is part of the NFL's reluctance. You know, they're demolishing all kinds of property and pulling up trees, and you saw it in Nashville. They're doing it in Cleveland. They're moving around the whole downtown for this event. It's not moving. It's still staying in April. So what is now going to happen, and I think the hot season of this next COVID wave is going to be in March, which I believe is going to wipe out the pro day circuit altogether again. So if you're an agent and you're a player or you're a trainer, be prepared. I don't see it happening. I do not see pro days happening. And now what you're hearing is the Combine will be held in April. What does that look like? Will players even want to participate in a pro day in March if they have a Combine invite? If there was one thing we learned from last draft cycle, which I don't know it resonated or not with the players, do not bypass an opportunity to perform because you may not get another one. Biggest lesson to be learned from last year's draft cycle. Will players heed to that advice? I don't know. But the Combine in April is looking like a real thing, which means First 2 weeks of April is the combine. You got 2 weeks to set your board. And then, hi-ho, here we go. John Murphy, instant impact and analysis. What do you take?
A lot of it's already set up prior to going there. So you're moving, you're not moving your whole board post the combine. So that would be interesting. Does it lead to potentially some more movement, in terms of I just saw my guy and now I have a chance to get him? Does that make teams maybe more likely to make some trades or do some maneuvering? Because, when you're at the combine in March, there's a little more time frame between it, right? You can get hot at the combine and then 6 weeks later it kind of cools off, a little bit with things. So, if it's all kind of crunched together, number one, does that mean the information flow kind of alterates and changes? The other part of this that has nothing to do with the combine, but everything to do with the NFL, hey, there goes your one opportunity if you were teams and agents to think, hey, we'll be in Indianapolis together and we could talk about free agency. Well, no, back to virtual free agency again, in this time frame. So amazingly, this all started in March, and potentially here we are again saying March is going to be a tipping point, for this. So, yeah, I think that's going to be the element here. Is there's no doubt, the NCAA knew, and we mentioned it all summer, and leading into September. There's absolutely no way to lose the Final Four, not have fans, and certain elements of the NCAA football now hurt. There was no way for the NCAA and these institutions to do anything other than what they decided when it came to securing the basketball tournament. Because if you lose another one, then you might as well be playing, Iona versus Kentucky, you're just going to take it for a wrap. You just can't lose that much money in that short a period of time without institutions basically either closing down or having to forfeit their entire sports programs to keep the lights on. And so I think that, this was almost an inevitable scenario for them. And I'm not sure if the March, the threat that there's more coming in March, or this could get worse again, is just not the icing on the cake. Like, you almost have to imagine they were thinking of doing this, regardless. And a plan B for the NFL is that if the pro days are going to get wiped out, that maybe you then are having 2 weeks of the combine in April. And maybe the benefit there is maybe they're working out 350 to 450 instead of, 300 to 310 or 20 kids. Maybe they're able to expand it and add more guys to it. But I think the on-field drills, right, they don't do, for people that don't know, they don't do one-on-ones. There's no 7-on-7. There's no interaction between the players. But the one thing there is, and we've mentioned this about the other all-star games that are still planning to play in the coming weeks, down at the College Gridiron Showcase, they're not having, at least as of recently, quarterbacks throwing with the position groups. They just have somebody in the position group or with the position group throwing to the receivers, the DBs, and the running backs. There's not a combination of groups together on the field at any one time. So does that mean you're getting like stationary targets and stuff? Now, how will the NFL Combine work when it comes to that? Because we all know that normally they pick their quarterbacks and then they pick 2 or 3 guys that throw at the Combine. And that means they work out with the quarterbacks, but also running back, receiver, tight end, DBs. If they need somebody to throw, these guys are there. How are you dealing with those elements of the Combine? And are you able to have real people on the field starting the 40s, at the 10, at the 20? Where do you line everybody up? Because last time you looked, everybody wants to be at one spot or the other. And if you're all wanting to be at the 40 at the finish, you're going to have to then start limiting 2, maybe 3 people per organization and line them all up. Maybe the 32 rows or 1 to 32 in the draft or something like that. So, I can only imagine it from our standpoint, right? you're in the prime position there at the CFL Combine. Russ and I would be shoulder to shoulder. I doubt you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I can't see allowing more than 3 personnel. Like, you want a guy at the 10, the 20, and the 40. That's it. But we can't have more than three team reps into the Lucas Oil Stadium. Russ, your thoughts? By the way, John, it sounds like they need to hit up our guy Sawyer Thiessen over there with the seeker. Go ahead, Russ.
Well, I'll tell you a few things. Firstly, there's no doubt that it's the city of Indianapolis. If they're going to side with anybody, they're going to take the NCAA because that provides so much more money to their city. They have 50, 60,000 fans staying in their city for a week almost, as opposed to the NFL Combine brings in, 32 teams of 100 people each? That's nice, but that's not 60,000 people plus all the teams, all the players. So monetarily, they have no choice but to go with the NCAA. In terms of the Combine, I got told a few weeks ago that what they expect, and this was when they were debating still if it was going to move, is they heard there was going to be no timing by NFL people, that they were going to have to rely on electronic because they didn't want people down on the field. I got told that there were going to be no position drills. It was just going to be your basic testing, and all interviews would be done via Zoom. Now, this is all in discussion, but this is somebody who has a pretty good feel for what goes on. So they thought that was the case. The other thing I think that we haven't really mentioned here, this is to me the biggest concern of the whole thing with the Combine, is really, and I don't know about John or you, Rick, when I spoke to people last year after the draft, the biggest thing that people told me was we had to take guys off our board because we couldn't get complete medicals. Well, now there'll be no second look because it'll be too close. And normally when a guy has a bad medical, even if it's not a failing medical at the February, even if he doesn't get called back for a second look, the team has a month or two to get on the phone, send them to a local doctor there and get their own private physical. And that's not going to happen. So anybody with some type of serious medical thing, that is going to be a major red flag unless the CFL or the NFL decides to extend the stay for certain people, that a red flag shows up and they say, we're going to keep them for 4 days and we're going to put them through a whole battery of unbelievable tests to make sure we get the whole thing. So I think that's the biggest thing, is the medical side of this. If I were an agent representing a player and he didn't get an invite, best thing you can do, forget paying for training, forget paying for that, find a doctor, get a full medical checkup for the kid and have it videoed. Because the ability to provide that to teams, I got told by one team, they took 100 guys off their draft and free agency board, which normally total is about 300. They were down to 200 because they will not draft or sign a free agent if they do not at least have a complete medical to be able to put a check mark next to them that they've done the research. So that's a huge part of this that I think is going to influence a lot of guys' careers.
Well, teams are going to be forced to adapt, and we've seen the NFL, adapt
better than anybody else.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm confident all this is going to go out. They might have.
But I think the thing that we mentioned about what happened if the Combine got completely eradicated, I could see the same thing happening with something along these lines, which is if you had, and that's a huge number, but let's take that 100-player number and pretend like there is 100 out of 500 guys, that would be the main players that are either going to get drafted or signed as priority free agents. If you then said, there's 25 of them are out west, there's 25 in the Midwest, Southeast, you could divide them and say each team is assigned those players in their area, and you will then take a physical kind of there, or send them back to Florida State and have them have that physical done. And like Russ is saying, if you video it with their okay and the players signing off for all the medical reasons you have to do that now and privacy issues, you could, in essence, get some of that done the same way you could say, instead of clubs hosting 20 or 30 players prior to the draft, instead of having your local home pro day that's for your area, you could say like, hey, if there is a group of guys that were graded in the spring or graded in the fall, the clubs could then, collectively say like, okay, hey, here's all the guys in your region, have a element of timing days and do them over a course of a month so that you're not having 100 kids show up, to do a local pro day. You can narrow it down and say, okay, we're working out offensive players and then defensive or something along that line, and try to get, per se, everybody in the state of Louisiana worked out by the Saints. Everybody in Florida geographically divided. Same thing with the Texans and so on and so forth. And try to get as many eyeballs, on stuff. Because if not, I think the next level of this is going to be them having the videotape it and say, you're not trusting the watches. You're just saying everybody has an estimated 40 of some kind on a guy. So if you then give me that with a reasonable facsimile of a setup, well, I'm going to have to take what I take, and a 4.55 estimate's better than no estimate at all. Well, right. And I think you're going to have to look outside the box and just say, be prepared that you're watching the combine the way that, right, the way you're doing games right now, right? The game is there. You're not there, right, but you're commenting on a game that you're watching. You're just not live.
Well, going back to what Russell said is, it sounds like, if I didn't know any better, it sounds like they're creating an event to almost discourage teams from attending, right? Like, if you're not allowed in to test and get your own times, if they're
going to do it that way,
right? But if the interviews are going to be by Zoom anyway, there's limited personnel even allowed. You're not allowed inside to test. Well, then, hey, why? If I'm an NFL organization, why am I even going out there? Why am I sending anybody if I'm just going to go back in my room? The player's going to go back in his room, and we're going to hop on a Zoom call. The other thing is,
well, and especially if I can't go get my shrimp cocktail, then I'm not going at all. Right. I mean, and you can't get on Jerry's bus, and you can't get a shrimp cocktail, and I can't watch 40s live. I mean, I might as well just stay home.
And right. Well, the other thing, I know Jerry will be there regardless. The other thing is, I think there'll be more. There would be, in theory, probably a greater need for the medical recall, because a lot of these guys, they tested positive for COVID. They probably haven't undergone a complete in-depth physical such as this manner. I'm sure there's going to be things that pop up, things that didn't exist, before, that do exist now. So it could really get logistically, right? If you fail, your medical report comes back with a red flag, first or second week of April. Man, there is really a small window, like you guys said, for teams to really figure that out.
I'm still trying to figure out how are we going to hear Gorsak blow the whistle at the start of the 40 in a hazmat suit?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. It's you got to be a little bit nervous about how this whole thing's going to work out. But you know what? I give them credit. They found a way to get 256 games in.
Yeah, they'll find a way.
Yeah, I mean, they'll find a way. I think the important thing to remember is I don't think they care if it's done right in terms of, and I don't mean right in terms of correctly. I don't think they care if it's fair to all the teams. I don't think they care if certain teams do well or don't do well. They just want the event to go on.
Adapt.
Yes, because people are going to watch.
Right.
Now, I will say this sort of goes into something else I really believe, which is just a side note. You talk about all these people that are going to pay all these broadcasters, and we're almost getting 18 million. Never once, except for John Madden, have they shown that any broadcaster affects ratings. Why would any of these networks pay any of these people money? I mean, seriously, you can literally go get good people for no money. That's just a side note. But again, it's the game. People watch the game. They don't care if a moose is calling the game.
That's right.
They just want to watch the game.
This is true. Last note, Roy Countryman in the chat room, why wouldn't the combine move, right? Well, that would be the easy thing to do, but they have big plans to move this thing to LA eventually. And so the state of California is one of the hardest states to move an event into right now. So
not just that. Let's remember, one of the great things, and I'm sure this is why Indianapolis put the combine, is all the hotels are connected. You can essentially bubble your players.
Sure.
And your staff within that and not allow them to go out. Make them wear tracking devices. You can literally keep them from exiting onto the public through fairways because of that sort of bridge system. And I think that's a big part of why Indy has a monopoly on certain events.
It's designed to host an event like the Combine. There's a lot of an emphasis put into the hospitals there as well. So interesting news here to start off the show today. NFL Combine could be headed to April, and definitely going to, reverberate throughout the NFL draft process. There's a trickle-down effect on how this is going to impact players. The top 100, they're going to be okay. It's, day 3 priority free agent guys who are going to feel the brunt of the consequences or the rearrangement.
Regardless, Turner will not be full go to run his 40, whether it's March or April.
No, he won't. David Turner is on the 15-day DL. He's on the 60-day DL, coming off of ankle surgery. We'll have a David Turner sighting later in the week, by the way.
Don't threaten us.
Yeah, right. Tomorrow, our good friend Coach Grabowski will be on from CoachTube.com talking about all the wonderful things he's doing with the First and Goal event coming up. Thursday, we've got Dane Vandernat and Neil Stratton. Friday is a Football Friday edition with Big Law. But today we've got Russell Lande, who always breaks down the prospect previews. And we're working our way through the college football season. Bowl game season now behind us. One more matchup. We'll take a look ahead at the college football playoffs, Russ. But it was a good week last week. Football was on just about every day, all day, around the clock. Give us a couple players here that stood out to you.
Well, I'm going to give you one that stood out and one that I think makes you have to go back and watch some more film. And these are both from the 2 semifinal games. But I mean, to me, I looked at Aaron Banks from Notre Dame, the big guard. Everybody talks about Eichenberg because he's going to be somewhere in that top 20 or 25, one of the first tackles taken. But I thought Aaron Banks really showed that athletically he is an NFL player. And I think he also is going to make people say, you know what, he's a big kid, he's long-armed. He has flipped out to left tackle occasionally when Eichenberg has been hurt, not for long stretches, but for 20 or 30 snaps at a time, to where I think NFL teams now are going to peek at him and say, okay, is this guy that we could potentially look at as a right or left tackle because he is so long, he's athletic, even though he is a bigger kid in terms of weight-wise. I think he's in the 350s, but athletically he impressed me. Now, I will say the thing that concerned me, even though they dominated and I was stunned how easily they won Ohio State, was the fact that Clemson basically said, we are going after Shaun Wade. And that, to me, when you hear the announcers say that that's what the coaches told them, that raises a huge red flag. Because trust me, no one ever tells you we are attacking a corner who's going to go in the top 5 or 10 in the NFL draft if he's legitimately that good. And he gave up catches. It wasn't like he broke up all the passes and shut him down when they tried to go at him. So that one concerned me a little bit, is he looked like he got pushed around a little bit, didn't look like he wanted to be overly physical at times. So I would be a little bit nervous. I'm going to go back and pull the film on Ohio State over the last 3 or 4 games and really take a peek at him, because that concerned me that they went after him aggressively and they completed passes against him.
We've seen it all season long now. The Penn State wide receiver did him dirty a couple times. Freifogel.
And usually the best corners don't get the ball thrown their way. I mean, I remember when Terrence Newman came out of Kansas State, I think his senior year, it was something like 16 balls were even thrown to his man for a whole season. Yeah. And I think Clemson went after this kid like 7 or 8 times in one game. So, I mean, it's definitely, I'm not saying, hey, he's a terrible player, but I'm saying it's going to make me go back and really study the film to evaluate why it is that they were going after him, and more, does he have the skill set to be a frontline corner at the NFL level? I've not graded him yet, so now I really want to dive in.
Well, you've seen it now frequently enough where you've really got to begin to question, eyebrows were raised when Chase Young basically told me Shaun Wade's a better player than Jeffrey Okudah. I'm not sure he's a better player than Damon Arnett at this point, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it is, switching him outside, as a team, I think it made sense. You had other guys. You had guys that you felt comfortable, had learned, how to play the slot, and you were going to put your best guy outside and then let your other guys kind of fill in. He just doesn't look as comfortable, outside. So the good news for him is he's not going to go where he was projected. I don't think he falls or has like the, a big a fall as like a Greedy Williams did, where everybody had projected he could battle to be a first round pick, and he, didn't see anything near the first round and goes into second. But I could see a team that sees him inside and is going to use him in the slot, still pick him in the first round. I don't think he's anywhere in the vicinity now of Patrick Surtain. And there's probably going to be others that, if they can compete outside, he just doesn't look like he trusts, himself out there. And the other part is, I want to see him run, what his 40 time is, because he's supposed to be 4.4, and the catch-up speed is that they can't be that every one of these guys is just running, just killing them, and it's not on nickel and dime, routes where you can say it's his eyes or, he's just opening the gate and then he's not closing on guys the way that you would expect somebody who was, coming into it with the type of grade that he had. I think there were some other guys. I think Mac Jones, I'm actually texted to you, Rick, during the game. I think you got to start watching more of it to say it's not going to be for everyone, but he might be a precise enough passer, and he's got a little more confidence than the kind of the way he comes across is kind of quiet and, a little different, demeanor than most quarterbacks, in this day and age. But, his accuracy and the factor that he's putting that ball right where those guys can make plays. Now, they're hellacious athletes, that he's playing with, and every guy's an NFL player, basically that he's playing with. But I think he's at least making you think again to go back and watch and make sure that he might not be the best of that next tier group of guys. And is he a guy that someone wants to jump back into the first round, and come get, if he was still there? I think that's a guy that kind of has changed, some operatives. Cooper, he was all over, Clemson's offensive line. I think he has definitely done a sharp, upswing, in terms of, he doesn't have 10 or 12 sacks, but he is getting constant pressure. He is a guy that looks like he might be able to even play a little bit in space and is a better athlete than maybe some people gave him credit for. And then I'll say this, and it's not just because of he hasn't changed that much as a player, right? They won the other night 41, I think 23 or 27 over North Carolina, and he had no touchdowns and no interceptions. But if Jimbo Fisher can figure out a way to convince Kellen Mond and the opt-out receiver to come back with the roster that they have, Texas A&M might give Alabama a run for their money next year if Mac Jones declares and they're playing with a young quarterback. A&M might have enough firepower on both sides of the ball then to give an Alabama or almost anybody a run for their money. So they play a closer game against Alabama next year, even if they lose. That Texas A&M team, with another year of all those freshmen and sophomores gaining experience, and you watch Anais Smith and you watch Spiller, then they pull out Devin Archipeng, and he goes for 150 in that game against North Carolina so these are all freshmen and sophomores. If they're able to retain the nucleus of that team and Kellen Mond returns, that could be a team that's in the Final Four next year. Not right outside it. It could be a legitimate top 4 team next year, because there's a lot of firepower there for you to win a game against North Carolina and score 41, and your starting quarterback had no touchdowns in the game. There's some definitely looking on the upswing at Texas A&M. And if he leaves, it would not be shocking to see, a top rated transfer portal quarterback end up at A&M after you see what kind of roster you're coming to play with.
Yeah, last time I checked, Kellen Mond was narrowing down his finalists of agents. I don't know if that's changed since then. I will say, North Carolina was like down to their C squad, right? That wasn't even the B squad. They were down. And shout out to Daz Newsome for playing in that game where, you had Dynamite Brown, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, all these players opting out, Chaz Surratt. And here's Daz Newsome that said, hey, you know what? I've got too much, sweat equity to give up on my team now. Just a little something that, you store in the back of the memory bank. If he's still lingering on day 3, you say, man, I love this guy's DNA, because you hear from the coaches there, this guy's highly competitive. He's a great presence inside the locker room. And he's really one of the top tiered slot receivers, I think, in this prospect. Now, does he hear his name called before day 3? I don't know. Maybe. By the way, Scouting the Nation up on the website, we talked about Daz Newsome and Kyle Poland, the West Virginia long snapper, giving some special teams some love. But you mentioned Cooper, and I don't think he has a high of ceiling as some of these other guys, but he's got a high floor. And the name is slipping my mind. There was an Ohio State defensive lineman that went down to Mobile last year, had a great dominating week of practice. I think we may have even slapped a first-round grade on him. He wound up going in the top 50, I think, to Jacksonville, and has had a pretty solid season. But I think that's the kind of player you're getting, just somebody who could come in, be serviceable immediately, right? He's not going to dominate, but he can be a solid starter for years to come. I think that's what you get with Jonathan Cooper there at Ohio State. And for me,
the one other thing that I saw in these bowl games that impressed me, and we'll see what kind of player the kid turns out to be. Did you see the image at the end of the Georgia-Cincinnati game when they came back and were giving out the hardware? Did you see the one kid in the end zone from Cincinnati stood there and watched all of that? So their starting corner, I think his last name is Harris, he stood out on the field in the far end zone the entire time and watched all the post-game festivities and watched it and was looking up on the board, when they were showing them getting the award and getting the trophy and whatever. Talk about having the right DNA. It wouldn't be shocking if that kid turns out to be a real dude.
Yeah, I like that.
Right? Because you stayed out there. And I noticed that, it happened a couple of years ago, with another kid, with a team that had never really, they had never won. Mm-hmm. And they asked him afterwards, and he was like, I've never experienced it. And I wanted to know what it looked like so I would know how to share it with my guys in the locker room. Like, hey, that's what it's going to be like. That's why we'll get up, and keep working out at 5 a.m. Because if you're Cincinnati, you can't stop doing what you've done to get to where you're at because you haven't gotten there yet. You just got to play in a game against Georgia. You still lost. Right? So everybody can always say, yeah, but you weren't even good enough to beat Georgia. So you still didn't get over that hump, right? Indiana's another team like that, right? Yeah, good game, but you lost to the middle of the road team in the SEC. How good are you? Right? So I think, on Northwestern side, you won the game. In those other instances, you lost, right? Coastal Carolina. In order to get back or to keep the momentum going, you're going to have to do all of the little things you've been doing to build up your program. If you get to your big game and it flops, you got to go kind of back to square one and find something you can do, to try to take that next step. Because we've seen it. I mean, in Notre Dame, it's clear you don't have the perimeter athletes on either side of the ball, the edge rusher, the wide receiver, the corner. But you also have to go back to your realization of there's some things we have to do when we get into those big moments that we can't be playing that style offense all the time. We can do it in the regular season and beat people because we're more physical. We can't play Clemson and Alabama and think you're going to score in the 20s and get into and really be in the game. Right? You got to figure out a way to have a more explosive offense and not be out there with, 13 personnel for 45 plays. You're not beating Clemson or Alabama with 3 tight ends.
And this, quite honestly, I don't even think this is a hot take, but this is the most impressive Alabama offense I've seen under Nick Saban. And to me, final point I'll make since you brought him up, Mac Jones, for me, I now have him ahead of Kyle Trask. I'm sorry. I just, I can't get behind using a high selection on Trask, which is what you're going to have to do. And whether that's day one or day two, I want nothing to do with that party. So the state of football here, weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern, Ric Serritella, John Murphy, joined by Russell Lande, like we are each and every Tuesday, breaking it down for the people. I do want to get into some of the front office rumblings. So let's take a look quickly at this college football championship. We'll break it down more on Friday, and of course on Saturday, the NFL Draft Tailgate Show. We'll talk more about this championship matchup between Ohio State and Clemson. But give me a little tidbit here, Russ, who you're keeping an eye on.
Well, I mean, I think everybody wants to see how does Justin Fields follow up. I mean, he just crushed Clemson. He had one of the best games of his entire career, and he was sort of one-legged after that shot to his hip and his ribs. I mean, it was really an impressive showing by him. I think teams want to see how does he handle this. Also, how's Thayer Mumford, their left tackle, who I think had a huge jump from 19 to 20 in his play. He looked so much more polished, so much more consistent playing on that left side. Well, even though Alabama does not have rare pass rushers this year, they're still pretty good. Alabama is known for producing defensive linemen, especially technically sound guys. So this would be a good test for Mumford to show what he has. I think NFL teams still are really intrigued by, could he be a left tackle at the next level as a starter? They want to see how he does against Alabama. This, to me, is a big game for him. But I can't wait to watch Fields. Mac Jones, a guy I can't wait to watch film on. Forget watch the game. I want to watch film because I haven't graded him yet. And I know a lot of people are talking about him as a high pick. I really want to get a feel for him, just like I haven't finished many of the players except for Trey Lance of the quarterback class because they played so many games after I initially looked at him. But Mac Jones is one of the real intriguing guys, but I can't really speak to him because I haven't really graded any film.
I think he would be a good fit with Pittsburgh. I think he's the player that they thought Mason Rudolph was, But I think, and we don't know if Big Ben's coming back for another year or not, but I think Mac Jones would fit that system. And, that would be a scenario where I know Big Ben has been a problem in that building, but bring him back for another year, hand the torch to Mac Jones. He'll be starting by the second part of next season. One other guy, Trey Sermon, I wrote about in Scouting the Nation. He's almost an afterthought in this game.
He is, yeah. He played great.
I think this guy is approaching top 50 status. If not, at the very least, is going to cement himself as a day 2 selection. And, Cornell Powell, I see him getting a shout there in the chat room from our guy Roy there. I mean, what he did to Sean Wade and how he's been playing, that's another guy that'll be down in Mobile. Oh, by the way, we'll have heavy representation down at the Senior Bowl. So be on the lookout for the NFL Draft Bible Familia there. John, I'm going to put your thoughts for the college football championship game on ice. We'll talk about that more throughout the week. I want to dive into some of these front office rumblings, though. And Russell brought up Justin Fields, who, let's just play a little what if scenario because that's the smoke signal season we're in. But what if Justin Fields pulls off the ultimate upset? What if Justin Fields lights up that Alabama defense like he did to Clemson? And what if Urban Meyer, who we're rumored to hear now, could be taking over those Jacksonville Jaguars? Is there any shot Justin Fields is the first quarterback off the board? And your thoughts on the whole Urban Meyer scenario down there to Jacksonville?
Well, I mean, I think I really look at it and say, forget just Justin Fields. Is it also possible that Zach Wilson gets in that mix? I mean, there are some teams I know that have them 1 and 1A with Lawrence and Wilson.
I think the Urban Meyer relationship with Fields maybe.
Maybe, but I really think that it's going to be a 3-man race. Like I have not graded Fields yet because I was waiting to see them play their whole season because they have such a short season. But I really think if he is as good as people are saying when I actually break down the film, I do think it's going to be a 3-man race because although I've spoken to a lot of people who have Lawrence first, I've also heard them all say they view him in the category of Justin Herbert, Tua in terms of being a high first-round pick. They don't view him as an Andrew Luck type once in a 10 or 15-year quarterback. So if that's the case, and he's viewed in that Herbert-Tua range, which is still awfully good because Herbert, I thought, was by far the best rookie quarterback this year and stood out and looks like he's going to be a star. If he's at that level, there were 3 quarterbacks that went in the top 6. You got to look at all these 3 guys on an equal playing field if none of them are considered generational type talents.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting there in Jacksonville, where taking a look here at the state of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ray Farmer is going to be coming in for an interview. Jerry Reese is already interviewed, as has Louis Riddick and Rick Smith. So, 4 minority candidates there by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So they got the Rooney Rule out of the way. Any of these guys here that they've interviewed or plan to interview, John, have a legitimate shot at the job?
Well, I mean, I think that I don't see, the Jaguars wasting their time, per se. I think that they're looking, you see the Detroit Lions, literally, if you're a candidate, they're interviewing you. I mean, and the same with the Carolina Panthers, and then you heard the Jets yesterday say with the coaching search that, hey, if you're expecting this to get announced anytime soon, that's not happening. We're going to be interviewing a huge amount of people. And, oh, by the way, we're going to just be using our GM. That's what he's here for. That's what he's doing. The Jacksonville scenario has become interesting because if you are working with Urban Meyer, then do not be under the delusion that you are going to have full control, because you will not. You will have Pete Carroll-ish issues with the coach is going to be as involved with the roster and personnel as the GM. And the second part is when you listen to Mr. Khan and his opinion of where things are at, he seems like he might want to start delving in a little more handsy, in his scenario there. Now, is that a smart move? We'll see. Is that posturing or positioning, with things? Maybe. But, you have to admit, they have the best resources available. You have the max amount of space. Jets, I think, are 2. You have the most picks. Jets are second. And you're not hemorrhaging in terms of negative contracts because, well, other people have let all those contracts go. So the biggest aspect of it is identifying who you want, what you want, how you're going to build it. And then in Jacksonville, the sustainability is, can you draft some of these guys, develop them, and then, re-sign them? Don't let them leave. Don't trade them for other draft picks. Don't trade Jalen Ramsey for a draft pick to then draft C.J. Henderson. Hey, how not to be a shitty football team. Don't do stupid things. That would be first. So you can't make the mistakes that they've made and trade away a pass rusher and a corner, accumulate 2 draft picks, and then turn around and go, we drafted a pass rusher and a corner with those same picks.
But let me ask you this.
What have you done?
Let me ask you this.
Accomplish anything?
When you hear that, hey, Urban Meyer could be coming in here and he'll kind of be the de facto GM, and you hear, hey, the owner, he's probably going to want to have a say on a lot of this free agent money that you got to spend. Whereas, despite what we thought would be a very heavily involved Woody Johnson, based on his meeting with the media yesterday, what you're hearing is going to be a more hands-off approach from Woody Johnson, whereas he's going to give Joe Douglas all the authority now. They're not using a search firm. Woody Johnson, from my understanding, is not even going to be in the room when they interview the head coaching candidates. And to me, Russ, that is the kind of authority you want as a GM. My question is, when you look at the scenario in Jacksonville, yes, they have all these picks, they have all this cap room, but when you're coming in just to be a puppet, does that kind of cut you off from the cream of the crop candidates here?
Well, firstly, let's remember, Mr. Khan is an extraordinarily bright man. He didn't get to where he is just by inheriting a team or stumbling into winning the lottery. He built a business. This guy's a smart man. What he's saying may not be what he actually wants to do. I think part of why he's putting that out there is he wants to meet with these coaches and these general managers, hear what they think of his idea of his being involved. He wants to see if somebody comes in and is all combative about it, or does someone talk about a manner in which he's going to have the whole organization work as a team? Because the reality is, whether the head coach is the man in charge like Oakland or New England, or the GM is in charge, like a situation in Pittsburgh or Chicago, if you are not all working together and everybody on the same page, the odds of the organization being successful are zero. I think Mr. Khan understands this. I think he wants to get a situation where whoever he hires as a GM and the head coach understand that they have to work as a team. There can't be backstabbing. There can't be as much politics as is normal in front offices. That's why, to me, I think you mentioned the 4 guys that have interviewed. I think the 2 guys, firstly, that have experience in terms of successful experience running teams, Rick Smith and obviously Jerry Reese is the cream of the crop with 2 Super Bowl trophies in a decade as a GM. I mean, to me, that's an easy hire as a GM. But I think the fact that he's putting that out there, I think tells you that Mr. Khan wants to make sure that the front office as a whole is going to function well. And there is not going to be people coming to him with all different arguments. He wants to be able to make sure it functions correctly. So I don't think it's a big impetus to get people to say, I don't want to go there, I'd rather go to the Jets. I think people are going to be pretty excited to talk to him. He's the type of owner you want to work for. He's very patient. He believes, I mean, they've been losing for a decade and their GM just lost his job. I mean, this is a patient guy who understands the importance of building a foundation and doing things the right way. So I think a lot of people would love to get in the mix, especially well-known people who are going to have options, are going to want to be involved in that Jacksonville situation.
Well, let me ask you this, because you mentioned Jerry Reese, and he comes from, working with Tom Coughlin, and there's a little bit of an association there. But I'm looking at these candidates, Russ, Jerry Reese, Louis Riddick. These are the only 2 guys that have had multiple interviews with different organizations. To me, I mean, this isn't even close. I mean, Jerry Reese is so much more qualified. I can't even fathom an organization wanting to hire Louis Riddick over Jerry Reese. I just don't get it.
Well, I mean, I think Jerry is probably going to get the nod if it's just the debate between those 2 guys. I think Riddick, what's intriguing is this is a guy who has worked in the league, and now in the media side, he's done a good job of expressing his opinions on the air. I think the concern teams have is if you look at recent outside-the-box hires, John Lynch going to the 49ers, yes, they made it to a Super Bowl, but 3 of the 4 years they've struggled. And part of that's been the quarterback situation. And then Mike Mayock going to the Raiders, they have not made the playoffs since he became the GM. So I think teams are saying, yes, I'm willing to look outside the box. And Lewis is an impressive guy when you hear him speak on the air. So I think they want to meet with him. But I think teams are going to be a little bit more hesitant to pull the trigger on that move unless there is someone that is so overwhelming when they meet with them that he literally puts guys like Jerry Reese, who to me are immensely qualified to be a GM again, or Scott Piola if he were to interview, or Thomas Dimitroff, someone like that, to put somebody who has no real experience running things in charge over people like that. He's going to have to blow them out of the water. And it's not a knock on him. It's just he's been in media for almost a decade.
Yeah, one other guy, Jeff Ireland, I failed to mention. He has interviewed with both the Carolina Panthers and the Detroit Lions, John, who you mentioned. They've already interviewed a dozen candidates for their GM vacancy. So I would imagine that's going to be a little bit lengthier process when you have that many candidates to weed through. But any other thoughts here on the GM side of things before we switch gears and talk about some of these head coach openings?
Well, I think the other part is looking, down the road when they come to their finalist or who they hire. You mentioned the Jets and the Jaguars and what they have, which is a lot of draft capital. Do they start narrowing their list and their people down to guys that are experienced with using that type of capital to build an organization? Then if you look in the middle of the group and towards the Texans and the Falcons, do you need an experienced guy in there right now? Do you need potentially, if you're those 2 teams, to look at Terry Fontenot and Jeff Ireland, an Omar Khan, somebody that has been involved with both the football and the contractual and the cap part of the equation, because your roster and your situation is not good, right? You have a bad business plan to go along with a bad football plan. If you are Atlanta and Houston and you're devoid of picks, you're minus on the cap, and you have a number of really bad contracts. So you don't need just a hot hire. You need somebody who can go in there, get hired, take the suit and tie off, put the boots and go get the shovel and go in there and get into that mix of what you got going on, and that you're going to be confident enough as an organization to say, I see the light at the end of the tunnel when the tunnel hasn't even been built yet. We're going to have to dig out of what we're in to get to the tunnel to then get back on the right track. Because if you look at those two teams, right, and quickly, Atlanta, you're behind Matt Rule, who's getting a GM that he's going to want to work with. They may at least have a quarterback on their roster for the long term that doesn't have a contractual disaster, and their cap's not a mess. And they drafted a whole bunch of defense that has worked out better to date than Atlanta. Tampa Bay, they're all in on the Brady train, and their roster is better than yours, and the Saints are better than you are right now as well. Indianapolis, we've mentioned they're one of the hottest teams and more balanced teams in the NFL going into the playoffs. The Jaguars have all that draft capital and a clean cap, and the Titans are better than both of them. And you're sitting at the bottom of that division with a quarterback, no draft picks, terrible cap situation, and potentially having to move away from your all-time franchise favorite player. And welcome to being the GM of the Texans. That's what you get. That's what you have. So you can't go in there and hire the hot guy, right? You can't go in there and hire somebody that is not ready to jump in and do some really hard work and some really dirty work. And if you're those two teams, you're either dealing with Watt, you're dealing with the contracts, you're dealing with those two receivers, and in Atlanta, you're dealing with doing something with Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, an overpaid O-line, and a defense that struggled since halftime of the Super Bowl. So you can't just hire the hot name. You can't hire somebody that went on TV and talked about how bad Howie Roseman's doing his job. You better hire somebody that has experience actually doing the job when it matters, not doing the job when they're doing fantasy football with a microphone in front of them.
The State of Football, Ric Serritella, John Murphy, Russell Lande, live broadcasting around the universe here, weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern. Of course, the NFL Draft Tailgate Show, Saturday, 10 a.m. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. We'll be joined by Coach Grabowski of CoachTube.com. Oh, by the way, Baldy Breakdown Seminars now available on CoachTube. We've got a good one lined up for you tomorrow, cornerback edition. He'll be breaking down Darrelle Revis, Stephon Gilmore, and Charles Woodson. So there's time to sign up for that Baldy Breakdown Seminar on the NFLDraftBible.com. I'm going to go a little bit OT here just because I do want to pick your brain, Russ, a little bit on some of these head coaching candidates here. And we saw Anthony Lynn get fired, creating another job opportunity in the marketplace. I think half a dozen head coach vacancies now. Just from first glimpse of the requests being put in here, it looks like from the surface, it appears to be year of the hot coordinator, and the guys that are getting a bulk of the interview requests, guys like Eric Bieniemy, Brian Dable, Joe Brady is a hot name, Robert Saleh, Arthur Smith. It appears, again, at first glance, that there's going to be a lot of these young, up-and-coming, quote-unquote, hot coordinators that are going to get a good hard look at becoming head coaches here. Your thoughts?
I don't have an issue with whether they're young, whether they're coordinators, position coaches. I think the biggest thing you have to find out, in addition to do they have the football knowledge to be able to sort of oversee one side of the ball and sort of really delegate that other side of the ball to someone, because very few guys really have expertise on both sides. But you have to find a leader. There are a lot of guys who are experts at sort of play calling or coordinating, but they don't have the leadership skills to run a team. Because being a head coach is not just about play calling. It's not just about being able to sit in one meeting with one position group and handle it. You have to lead men. This isn't an easy gig. There are a lot of guys who have been great coordinators and bombed as head coaches. So I think the biggest thing these teams need to do, and I'm not saying any of these guys don't have it, but you as an organization need to find out from the interview and from talking to former players under these guys and former coaches that have worked with them. What is this guy like as a leader? How is he going to be as the CEO of our football team? Because that's the most important thing. There are a lot of guys that are very smart, really good X's and O's guys that have not succeeded as head coaches. You need to find the complete picture. Also, you want to find somebody, ideally, whether they're young or old, that has had some struggles. And I don't mean struggles in terms of, oh, they had something happen off the field. I mean, with football, something went sideways. How did they sort of correct things and get things back on track? So I think there's a lot of things that go into this outside of just being a hot coordinator. But I think if you start allowing age to get in the mix, you're making a mistake. It has to be about real experience, not so much age, but real experience, real leadership. And what do people say about this guy behind the scenes? Those are the important things to me. I think you have to find out the real makeup of the person, because you don't want to bring in somebody who cannot lead your program. I think you're destined to fail if you don't have a leader as your head coach.
You know, I do tend to disagree with you a little bit on the age thing, Russ, because I think the one thing you can't teach in this business is experience.
Agreed.
And how many times have we seen a Josh McDaniels or a Raheem Morris fail because they were too young for the job? Now, you have exceptions to the rule. Sean McVay would be one of them, right? I mean, but, you know, a mind like that is not a common thing. And so to me, a guy like Joe Brady, who's 31 years old, I just don't know if he's ready. I mean,
no, and I agree with you. I mean, look at what happened in Cincinnati. I mean, you have to find out, are they a leader? That's the other part. That's the part of this that I think Sean McVay, it's not just how smart he is.
Yes.
I think the thing you want to find out is, and this is where age, you have to really look at it, is someone that gets to that point that's interviewing for a head coaching job in the NFL at 31, 34, 35, even 40. What is their ego? Do they think they reinvented the wheel?
Right.
Or are they the type that listens to outsiders and still believes that they can learn, but they have leadership traits? That's what I want. Because if you look at Mike Tomlin, he took over at 31 or 32 there at the Steelers, but he didn't have the arrogance to think, I have all the answers. And I think that's one of the great things you want, is you want a guy who's really smart, but also understands he's still learning and is a natural leader. I think when you combine those, that's why I'm saying, yes, age, you don't eliminate it, but I'm saying you also don't eliminate people just from being young. You want to meet with them and talk with them, but
right.
If they all of a sudden show their age, that's when there's a red flag. But if they show maturity beyond their years, then you say, okay, this is a guy we got to consider.
Good point. And I think the other part where I become leery, especially with the OCs, right? And we've seen it where, you know, and you mentioned it, I think you're exactly right. The head coaching job is a CEO position more than ever before, in my opinion.
No doubt. Just like a GM job is.
Yes. And so, you know, where I get a little bit leery now, and I'll throw it over to you, John, for your thoughts, is a guy like Brady or Arthur Smith or even Brian Dable, how insistent are they going to be to call their own plays and then also be my head coach? Again, there's going to be exceptions to the rule. But to me, I just think it's too much, especially for a young guy. And I don't mean to discredit Brady. I've never met him personally. He may be more than qualified. I have no idea. I don't know what his ego is. I don't know what kind of leader he is. But I'll tell you this. He was just coaching LSU last year. To elevate him to head coach and have him calling his own plays, it's going to be a lot on his plate. I'm just saying that, and I'm surprised a guy like Raheem Morris, he only got one interview request with the Atlanta Falcons. I'm shocked by that. But it looks like finally maybe Eric Bieniemy, this could be your year, because everybody has put in a request to speak with Mr. Bieniemy. John?
Yeah, and I think you look, I mean, they've also, you know, look to interview multiple people on Kansas City, both, you know, coach-wise with Bieniemy, but also staff-wise with GMs. And I think that is a very smart move by clubs, that some of the people you're interviewing sometimes can be to learn about what other good franchises are doing. So you may learn more about that person, but you're also learning about what are they doing? And for those guys that have never gotten those interviews, that's an important step to say, I'm going to take the interview, even if people are like, why are they interviewing that guy? That guy's not getting the job. Well, that's not important. I have to at least be involved with the interview process to then get the word of mouth out there of how do you become that other guy, right? And you're seeing Bieniemy, and then if Bieniemy leaves, does that move Kafka to a prime position that then puts him at the driver's seat a year from now or 2 years from now, to be in that role? And I think with Brady, it comes down to not just the thing of, are you going to call your own plays? It's, what is your staff? Who do you have behind you that you're saying, hey, I'm hiring a Wade Phillips on defense type guy. I'm hiring that same sort of thing on the offensive side of the ball. He's the offensive coordinator. I may call the plays, but I have somebody in the room so that I can be in there on special teams meetings. I can be in there with the defense. I can do other things that a head coach has to do. So if I'm employing the right people, that also shows me that you don't have to worry about the age, because I could say it the same way the other direction, which is it's been 20-something years. Is Brian Dable on the other side of the equation somebody that you're saying, how come he's never come in front of my desk before? Where have you been for 20 years? Why is this now happening? And is what they've done in Buffalo, is that something that we can replicate here? At what he did at Alabama, is that something we can replicate? Or do you end up, and again, it's just saying, if you're in that chair, are you ending up with Freddie Kitchens? Right? Are you ending up with the guy the Giants had, to say like, hey, you couldn't replicate what they had in Green Bay, and then you ended up with a very average head coach. So if you're looking at those things, you can look at it and say, hey, wait a sec. I don't care what age he is. He goes to LSU from the Saints. Well, the Saints had a great offense. He goes to LSU. They have an all-time great offense. He goes to Carolina. Teddy Bridgewater has the best season he's ever had.
Yeah.
And they play most of the year minus Christian McCaffrey, and they have a great running attack with Mike Davis. Okay, so what is this guy doing at 31 that he seems to be on the trend, right? If he's trending, but he's trending for all the right reasons, I'm not really looking at the back of the football card to be like, oh man, that's his date of birth. Oh my God. Shoot, we got bathroom attendants at the stadium that are older than this guy, and stuff. You're not paying attention to it if the reason he's trending is correct, right? I think Arthur Smith is being interviewed by all those teams for two reasons. One is he's a viable candidate. Two, you want to know, what in the hell are you guys doing down there to where you lose Taylor Lewan and you got guys, that guy ran 4 times for 200 yards this year. Only one time did you have your real offensive line. What are you guys doing down there where you turn a former receiver, turned quarterback, turned draft pick, turned ex-draft pick, turned bust, turn into a MVP candidate? You drafted the other Ole Miss receiver, and he's a juggernaut, right? So you're looking at what they have down there. You lose, the best tight end. They're all-decade tight ends, since that's another thing we're working on. You lose Delaney Walker, and you're still churning out. They're 2, they're 3, right? The 3rd and 4th string tight ends make plays, for the Titans. You look at how their offense has persevered through losing some of their higher end personnel. And at times, Corey Davis hasn't been a top 10 pick. They've played a lot without Taylor Lewan. And you look at the numbers that they've put up offensively, you want to know what is this Arthur Smith? What is this offense that they got going on down there? So some of these interviews is because you've earned the right. Some of it is for teams and organizations to be like, what can we do to mimic the success that some of these clubs are having? So I think if Arthur Smith comes in and says, the reason I want to call my own plays is because I've hired this, and this, is different than the reason I'm calling my own plays is I'm the best play caller in the world, and, like that's just the bottom line. And so you're hiring me. I'm going to be the head coach, OC, quarterback coach. Yeah, I'm like, okay, well, we know. Thanks for the interview, and get your door prize on the way out. Somebody who comes in with a plan and says, I'm calling it, but then my plan is year 2, I'm now handing the headset over. Year 3, the OC's calling it with the quarterback coach, and here's the thing. It's me with a veteran OC, and then I got this quarterback coach who's another young guy who learns the offense. So, hey, when we're good and we lose the OC to a head coaching job, we have our offense rolling the next 3 to 5 years because we have a path of success from me to those 2 guys. And, oh, hey, here's what we're doing on defense. I think that's a totally different scenario when somebody comes in and says, hey, I have a plan and I have a path of how to do things. And you look, I mean, it's not the NFL, sure, but you look at where Russ is working right now. The GM was the head coach. Before that, he was an OC quarterback coach. He had a guy behind him who was a quarterback coach turned OC. Then they double down behind that and hire the best run game guy in the league who coaches their O-line. And in a 5-year plan, the one guy goes up to being GM president. The next guy becomes the head coach. 3 years after that, the run game coordinator becomes the OC. Big surprise that you're winning double-digit games every year with a top 3 offense if you have it all in line. And I think that's where the hires of these people, it's great when they say hands off and it's Joe Douglas making a decision. But I also don't think it's a bad thing when Mr. Khan says, hey, this time when I'm spending my money, I better at least know what I'm getting myself into. Because if I'm going to hire and spend $10 or $12 million, on Urban Meyer, well, I better team Urban Meyer with somebody who's either veteran enough to not care that you're going to hear Urban Meyer, and nothing about the other guy who got hired, or I better hire somebody who wants to be the GM of the team and cares about doing the job, and again, does not care that it's going to sound like the Jacksonville Jaguars featuring Mr. Khan and Urban Meyer, and oh, by the way, you're down on the bottom, you're kind of at the bottom, right? Like you're just kind of like cast as the GM, and if you can live with that, then it's a good match, right? So I think the thing with this is watch the matches that are made here between coach and GM, and then you can start strategizing how you think this is going to turn out for somebody.
Well, I will say this. We're running over time here. The final thoughts. Arthur Smith, you wonder what the magic is behind Ryan Tannehill. The other guy I wanted to just comment on, Brian Dable. We talk about how Nick Saban brings guys down to rehab their image or get them the next head coaching gig. Here's a guy who left on his own accord and said, hey, you know what, Nick? I'm tired of you because you don't listen to me, right? He pounded the table for Tua. Tua's my guy. Saban refused. He refused until the halftime of that national championship game where Tua comes in and wins the game. That was the end of Brian Dable in Alabama. He said, I'm out of here. Hit the eject button. Parachuted right out of Bama, went on to the NFL. I didn't think he did such a great job when he was the OC at the Jets, I'll be honest with you. And, to your point, John, you wonder if that ego clashes. But I like that. I like a guy with his own conviction that says, here's the greatest college football coach of all time, but I've had it up to here. I'm out of here. I like a guy like that. So we'll talk more about this throughout the week. Like I said, David Turner will be back. He's got a good finger on the pulse. He's talking to a lot of the candidates who are being interviewed who we mentioned here today. So, hey, I'll take these 2 candidates, John Murphy, Russell Lande. Give me those guys as my GM, and we'll be off to the races in the NFL. 3-year plan. Give me 5 years. We'll bring home 2 chips. So, hey, NFL, hit me up. You know how to get at me. I've got the staff here. I don't mind being in the background. Hey, call me the water boy. I'm here for you. Squirt.
We already do.
All right. Parting shots, of course, every Tuesday. Russell Lande, he's been patient enough to join us two bozos each and every Tuesday for 60 minutes plus, always going OT on Tuesday. But again, football GM and scouting course seminar on sportsmanagementworldwide.com, creator of Infectious Scouting, and also the co-host of the Scouting Portfolio podcast with Matt Waldman. What else you got going on, Russell? What else you plugging away on your quarterback formula, cranking away on the analytics? It got a few people into hot water with the analytics this past weekend. What do you got cooking in the stove?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've been talking to some analytics people around the league that we've come up with some ideas we're going to incorporate into this year's quarterback thing, which hopefully will be done about early February. Right now I'm in the middle of a big project, but two things I want to point out with the whole search that's going on around the league for new coaches, GMs. Remember, people need to realize every time a head coach and head coach and GM or a GM gets fired, it's not just them. You're talking about generally 30 families that are going to be pulling their kids out of school and moving to another city. So people may root, oh, it's great, I want a new head coach. Just remember how many lives are being disrupted. Secondly, the one thing I will add to this is I've heard there's one or two big GM changes still to come. One probably in the next 2 weeks, one right after, one maybe now, one maybe after the draft.
Was Denver one of them?
No, Denver was not one of them. So one or two still to, at least I heard last weekend, the person who told me that reiterated yesterday, he still thinks at least one, if not both of them are going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with those. But I think the important thing to remember is that you may want change for your organization as a fan, but remember, these are people, they have families, and it does cause enormous disruption to a lot of people when changes are made.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Lynn being fired yesterday, there's a whole coaching staff now available. You're hearing already Dan Quinn could be headed to Las Vegas. To your point, Russ, we did get clarification, at least in Jersey, that David Gettleman will be back with the G-Men. We didn't really touch base a whole heck of a lot today on the Denver Broncos now open position as Elway fires himself and promotes himself all in one transaction. So, kudos to being able to do that. John Murphy will be back at it again, talking all decade teams. I know you're going to have some pushback on my selections like we did last week. We had fun with the Jaguars and Jets. I think tomorrow we'll be taking a look at some of the Texans, Falcons, and Bengals for the all-decade selections, along with Coach Grabowski of CoachTube.com. But today was a fun day, and we'll have more fun. Weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern. It's what we do here on the State of Football, your new home for real football talk in the mornings. John Murphy with a parting shot.
Yeah, I think the best thing is what Russ just said. We spent 60, or half of our 60 minutes talking about the changes and who's on the horizon, for jobs. I think it's just equally as important to spend 60 seconds realizing what Russ said. Like, hey, it's not just the individual who may or may not get hired, to work somewhere next year. There's sitting down and telling your family you're going to have to move. There's pulling kids out of school. Depending on how long you've been in a place, it's, then getting the optics of you're moving somewhere or you're headed off to your next job, which could be pretty quick, and you're leaving people behind that are having to kind of do all the grunt work of putting your whole house together and, moving shop and changing all those elements. And now imagine trying to do that during COVID. Good luck with that game plan, when it comes to it. So it is a tremendous business, one we all, have aspired and wanted to be in. But there is the downside to it, when this scenario comes up, and it comes up every off season, both at the collegiate level and, the professional level. But, just kind of, remember, when you're cheering for who's coming in, remember that, the quality of person that's going out, it should not be judged by their win-loss record, all the time. It's easy to do. We all do it. It's part of our daily lives. But, there's people at home that, their responsibilities are not judged by wins and losses. And I think it's easy to kind of get caught up, in that aspect of things that, you just kind of forget, that of all the other things that are going to have to go on, behind the scenes. Not only are you trying to find a new job, normally if that happens, you're not having to pack up and move your whole life and your whole family to another destination or another, city or state. And now just imagine trying to do that, during COVID. So, hey, while it's okay to appreciate and get excited in certain cities about what might be coming to you, there's probably a better time and way to use your time than to be on the internet bashing the guy that already has lost his job.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that times 1,000. Appreciate the panel here today. John Murphy, Russell Lande, of course, every Tuesday. Thank you guys for going overtime here. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. I failed to mention it yesterday. Floyd Little, we mentioned it a couple months ago, being moved to hospice, diagnosed with cancer last May. He loses his bout with cancer, passes away at the age of 78. Pro football royalty, the franchise, Syracuse legend, 5-time Pro Bowl with the Denver Broncos. Football lost a good one, of course, very prominent, well-known presence around the NFL Hall of Fame induction ceremonies up until a year ago. So thoughts and prayers out to the Floyd Little family, and may he rest in peace. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Thank you.